What would you do if the very thing you mocked, the faith you had discarded like a broken tool, was the only thing left that could save a life? This is the story of a man whose hands could shape wood into breathtaking beauty, but whose heart had been hardened into stone by grief. It is the story of a forgotten statue in a dusty chapel, in a village that had forgotten how to hope. It began with a bitter laugh and ended with a miracle that whispered through the parched fields and healed not just the sick, but the very soul of a community. Silas was a master woodcarver, and the village of Oakhaven knew it. His hands, calloused and stained with the memory of 1,000 forests, could coax life from the most stubborn block of oak or maple. He could carve a bird so delicate it seemed poised for flight, a flower so intricate you could almost smell its phantom perfume. But the man himself was made of harder stuff. Years had passed since laughter had echoed in his workshop. Years since the warmth of his wife and the bright chatter of his son had filled the spaces between the scent of cedar and pine. A fever had stolen them both in a single, cruel week, leaving Silas with nothing but his tools and an emptiness so vast it had swallowed his faith whole. He became a creature of solitude, his heart sealed shut like a winter bud that refused the spring. He saw the quiet faith of his neighbors not as a comfort, but as a fool's errand, a desperate wish whispered into an empty sky. The village of Oakhaven seemed to share in his desolation. It was a place caught between memory and dust. A prolonged drought had cracked the earth into a mosaic of thirst, and the once green hills that cupped the village were scorched to the color of old straw. The river, the town's lifeblood, had dwindled to a sluggish, muddy trickle. Hope was a currency they could no longer afford. This collective weariness had a physical heart, a place of shared neglect. At the edge of the village square stood a small stone chapel, its wooden doors warped and its bell silent. Inside, beneath a fine coat of dust that danced in the slivers of afternoon light, stood a statue of the Virgin Mary. It was old, carved from a single piece of linden wood by Silas's own grandfather. Once, it had been the pride of the village. Now, it was just a relic, a silent witness to forgotten prayers. A deep, jagged crack ran down the Virgin's face, starting at her temple and ending just below her sorrowful, painted eye, making it seem as if she were perpetually weeping a splintered tear. The statue was a perfect metaphor for Oakhaven itself. Broken. Forgotten. And then, the sickness came. It arrived not with a roar, but with a whisper, a dry cough in the throat of a child. At first, the parents dismissed it as a symptom of the dusty air. But the cough deepened, and a fever followed, a stubborn, clinging heat that no cool cloth could soothe. It moved through the village like a phantom, touching only the young. The doctor, a pragmatic man named Marcus, was mystified. His medicines were useless against the affliction. He could offer only worried reassurances that fell like stones into the growing well of parental fear. Desperation began to settle over Oakhaven, heavier than the dust. It was in this atmosphere of quiet panic that Elena found Silas. She was an old woman, her face a roadmap of a long life, her faith as simple and sturdy as the walking stick she leaned upon. She stood at the entrance of his workshop, the setting sun framing her small figure. Silas did not stop his work. The scrape of his chisel against wood was the only greeting he offered. "The children are unwell, Silas," she said, her voice soft but clear. He grunted, his eyes fixed on the grain of the wood before him. "I am a woodcarver, not a physician. The body is Dr. Marcus's concern," Elena replied, stepping into the shop. "It is the soul of this village that needs a doctor." She gestured vaguely towards the square. "The chapel, the statue your grandfather made. It is broken. The people see it, and they see our own broken hope." Silas finally looked up, his gaze cold. "It is a piece of wood, Elena. It was once more than that," she insisted gently. "And it can be again. Repair it, Silas. Do it for the children. As an act of faith." A short, harsh laugh escaped Silas's lips. It was a sound like stones grinding together. "Faith," he scoffed, turning back to his work. "Faith is what you have when you have nothing else. It is a story we tell ourselves in the dark." He drove the chisel into the wood with sudden, sharp violence. "Statues don't answer prayers, Elena. Wood is just wood." She did not argue. She simply stood in the silence for a long moment, her sad eyes on the rigid set of his back. "You mock what you do not understand," she whispered, and then she was gone. Silas's refusal hung in the air long after she left, as acrid as the smell of burnt timber. But his sharp words offered no shield against the deepening crisis. The sickness worsened. From his workshop, he could hear the stifled coughs carrying on the evening breeze. He saw the drawn, haunted faces of his neighbors. Then, the illness reached the small house next to his. It took hold of Alara, a little girl with eyes the color of the summer sky and a laugh that used to sound like tiny bells. Silas would see her parents, Thomas and Maria, standing vigil on their porch, their postures slumped in a silent language of fear he knew all too well. He recognized the hollowed-out look in their eyes. It was a mirror, reflecting the same helpless agony that had become his own reflection a decade ago. He tried to retreat deeper into his work, to lose himself in the familiar textures and scents of his craft, but the ghosts of his own past were now walking the dusty streets of his village. His solitude, once a fortress built to keep the world out, had become a prison cell. The silence within its walls was no longer peaceful. It screamed with the echoes of his own lost son's laughter, the ghost of his wife's gentle hum. Each day, the village grew quieter. The children's games ceased. The usual gossip in the market square died away, replaced by hushed, fearful inquiries. Dr. Marcus, his shoulders stooped with the weight of his failure, finally admitted he was defeated. "I don't know what it is," Silas overheard him telling Thomas one afternoon. "It's like a fire that consumes the energy but leaves no mark. There is nothing more my science can do." Science had failed. The rational world had run out of answers. And Oakhaven was left with only Elena's quiet prayers and a creeping, suffocating despair. That night, as Silas worked late, trying to carve away the thoughts that tormented him, a strange thing happened. Amidst the familiar, earthy smells of wood shavings and varnish, another scent arose, faint and utterly out of place. Roses. It was the distinct, sweet fragrance of fresh-cut roses, so vivid it was as if a bouquet stood on the bench beside him. He stopped his work, looking around the empty, cluttered workshop. The scent was gone as quickly as it had come. He shook his head, blaming the late hour, the stress. Grief, he knew, was a master of illusions. A few minutes later, a heavy mallet he had placed securely on a high shelf clattered to the floor beside him. He flinched, his heart hammering against his ribs. The shelf was solid. There was no tremor, no gust of wind. It had fallen without reason. A sudden, unnatural chill swept through the room, raising the hairs on his arms. He dismissed it all as exhaustion, a mind overwrought with worry and memory. But a tiny seed of doubt, of something inexplicable, had been planted in the barren soil of his certainty. He could not carve it away. The following night was worse. He heard a sound from the house next door. It was Maria, Alara's mother, weeping. It was not a loud, theatrical grief, but a soft, broken, hopeless sound that slipped through the walls and pierced Silas's carefully constructed armor. It was the sound that had once lived inside his own house. He could bear it no longer. He dropped his tools, his hands trembling. He was driven by an impulse he did not understand, a desperation that finally overwhelmed his pride. He walked out of his workshop and across the silent, moonlit square to the old chapel. The doors groaned open under his touch. Inside, the air was cold and stagnant, thick with the smell of decay and forgotten things. Moonlight streamed through the grimy arched window, illuminating the solitary statue on its pedestal. He stood before it, his artisan's eye clinically assessing the damage. He saw the cracked wood, the peeling paint, the clumsy, amateur repair someone had attempted years ago. It was just an object, a block of linden wood that his grandfather had shaped. But as he stared at the fissure that marred the Virgin's face, he saw something else. He saw the cracked earth of Oakhaven. He saw the broken hope in his neighbor's eyes. He saw the face of little Alara, pale and still in her bed. And he saw the shattering of his own life, the deep, unfixable crack that grief had carved through his heart. His cynicism, his bitter reason, his pride, it all crumbled into dust. There was nothing left but the raw, aching core of his pain and a terrible, helpless empathy for the suffering around him. A whisper escaped his lips, so quiet he barely heard it himself. Please. He did not know who he was speaking to. To the statue. To the empty chapel. To a god he had long ago renounced. It did not matter. The words tumbled out, torn from a place of ultimate desperation. If you are anything, if you can hear, don't let these children suffer. Not like this. Take me. Take anything. But not them. The last word was a choked sob. The strength went out of his legs, and he slid to the cold stone floor, his body racked with a grief he had held at bay for 10 years. He did not faint. He did not fall asleep. He simply fell through the floor of his own consciousness into a place between worlds. The dust and decay of the chapel dissolved. The cold stone beneath him seemed to vanish. He was adrift in a space that was not a space, filled with a soft, luminous blue light that pulsed with a gentle rhythm, like a sleeping heart. He felt a presence. It was not threatening or judgmental. It was a presence of profound, overwhelming sorrow, a mother's sorrow that encompassed every loss, every pain the world had ever known. It was a love so immense and unconditional that it made his own decade of grief feel like a single teardrop in an endless ocean. He felt it wash over him, not to erase his pain, but to hold it, to share it. Then a voice spoke. It was not a sound that entered his ears, but a thought that blossomed fully formed within his soul, a voice that was both feminine and timeless, gentle and absolute. My son waits for you. The message was simple, yet it resonated through every fiber of his being. It was not a command, but an invitation. Mend what is broken. And then, the light faded. Silas came to with a gasp, his cheek pressed against the cold, gritty stone floor of the chapel. The first, pale fingers of dawn were reaching through the arched window, illuminating the dust motes that still danced in the air. The chapel was exactly as it had been. Empty. Silent. Old. But something inside him was irrevocably new. The crushing weight that had sat upon his chest for a decade was gone. He felt light. In its place was not emptiness, but a deep, tranquil peace, a quiet sense of purpose that felt as real and solid as the chisel in his hand. He pushed himself to his feet, his limbs stiff and cold. He did not go back to his house to rest. He did not pause to make sense of what had happened. He walked directly to his workshop, his steps certain and steady. He unlocked a heavy wooden chest that he had not opened in years. Inside, nestled in worn velvet, were his father's tools and his grandfather's before him. They were the finest instruments, reserved for work that was more than just a craft. They were for work that was an act of devotion. With the chest in his arms, he returned to the chapel. He did not begin work immediately. He set the chest down and knelt before the broken statue. He looked up at the sad, cracked face, and this time he saw not a flaw in the wood, but a reflection of a shared sorrow. He reached out a trembling hand and gently touched the splintered tear on her cheek. And for the first time since he had buried his family, Silas wept. He cried not just for his wife and son, but for his own hardened heart, for his lost faith, for his suffering neighbors, and for the sick children of Oakhaven. They were tears of regret, of release, and of a strange, burgeoning gratitude. When the tears finally subsided, he opened the chest, took out the first tool, and began to work. He worked with a focus he had not known before. This was not the detached, technical skill of a master craftsman. This was a prayer offered in wood and labor. He did not just patch the crack. He carefully, painstakingly, recarved the damaged sections, blending the new wood into the old until the seam was almost invisible. He sanded the entire surface with the reverence of a monk illuminating a sacred text. He mixed paints from earth pigments, seeking the exact shade of sorrowful blue for her mantle, the precise hue of living warmth for her skin. He worked through the day and into the night, stopping for nothing. The villagers, noticing the light in the chapel and the sounds of his labor, would peer in, their faces filled with a mixture of curiosity and wonder. They saw Silas, their bitter, reclusive neighbor, working with a gentle intensity that transformed him. And as he worked, something began to shift in the village. It started the next morning. Silas was applying the final, delicate brushstroke, restoring the single, perfect tear on the Virgin's cheek. At that very moment, a cool breeze, the first in months, stirred the dead leaves in the square outside. It carried not the scent of dust, but the clean, damp smell of impending rain. A few moments later, Maria ran out of her house, her face a mask of disbelief and joyous tears. "Her fever," she cried out to her husband. "Thomas, her fever is gone." Alara had woken up, asking for a drink of water, her eyes clear for the first time in weeks. The news spread like a wildfire of hope. Across the village, another mother found her son sitting up in bed. A father heard his daughter laugh. One by one, the children were waking up from the grip of the mysterious illness, as if from a long, bad dream. Dr. Marcus went from house to house, his medical bag in hand, his expression shifting from professional skepticism to utter astonishment. "It's impossible," he muttered, checking Alara's now normal temperature. "Completely impossible. There is no medical explanation for this." As Silas, with the help of Thomas, carefully lifted the restored statue to carry it back to its rightful pedestal, the first drop of rain fell, striking the dusty ground with a soft hiss. Then another, and another. A gentle, steady rain began to fall upon Oakhaven, washing the dust from the rooftops, darkening the thirsty soil, and cleansing the air. It was the end of the long drought. By the time the statue was in its place, the entire village had gathered at the chapel doors, drawn by the twin miracles of healing and rain. They looked at the statue. It was no longer a broken relic. It was radiant. Silas's work had not just repaired it. He had imbued it with a living grace. The Virgin's face was a masterpiece of compassionate sorrow and serene hope. Then they looked at Silas. His face was streaked with paint and sawdust. His clothes were covered in wood shavings, but his eyes were clear and calm. The bitter hardness was gone, washed away and replaced by a profound humility. No one spoke. There was no need. Marcus, the man of science, simply stared at the statue, shaking his head in silent wonder. Elena stood at the back of the crowd, a slow, knowing smile gracing her lips as she nodded at Silas. It was a moment of pure, shared awe. In the days that followed, Oakhaven was reborn. The rain nourished the fields, and soon, tentative shoots of green pushed their way through the damp earth. But the true growth happened in the hearts of the people. Silas did not become a preacher. He did not stand before the village and speak of his vision. His transformation was his testimony. He became the quiet center of the community. He used his gifted hands not for art to be sold, but for acts of service. He carved beautiful, intricate toys for every child who had been sick. He helped Thomas repair his roof. He spent his mornings tending to the chapel, keeping it clean and welcoming. The chapel itself became a living place again. People came not just to pray, but to gather, to talk, to support one another. The cycle of grace, once broken, had been restored through small acts of kindness and a shared, unspoken faith. The statue of Mary stood as a permanent witness to their journey. If you looked closely, you could still see it. A tiny, hairline seam on her cheek where the worst of the crack had been. Silas had left it there intentionally. It was a quiet, constant reminder. A reminder that things of great beauty and great faith can be broken. But with humility, with hope, and with a love that is willing to serve, they can be made whole again, stronger and more beautiful in the very places where they were once scarred. The story of Silas and the statue became a quiet legend in Oakhaven, a testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest miracles do not shout from the heavens. They awaken quietly in a broken heart and ripple outwards, healing everything they touch. The story of Oakhaven reminds us that faith is not the absence of doubt or pain, but the courage to act in the face of it. It teaches us that sometimes we must mend what is broken in the world to heal what is broken within ourselves. The most profound transformations often begin with a single act of surrender, a moment of reaching out from our own darkness toward a flicker of light we can barely see. If this story of hope and renewal touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the quiet miracles of faith. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment where hope seemed lost, only to be restored in an unexpected way? Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that even after the longest drought, the rain can and will fall again.